Before he owned a single well, a single refinery, or a single mile of railroad track carrying his oil, John Davison Rockefeller owned a notebook. As a boy, he used it to record every coin he earned and every coin he spent, not as a hobby, but as a temperament that would define the rest of his life. Most biographies of great fortunes begin with ambition. This one begins with something smaller and stranger. He was born in 1839 in a small town in New York State into a household that never quite settled. Money came and went unpredictably. Faith was strict. In that home, order was not a luxury. It was survival. That habit of mind did not come from wealth or privilege. It came from uncertainty. A household shaped by movement and unpredictable income teaches a child one of two lessons. Either that money is something to fear, or that money is something to manage. Rockefeller absorbed the second lesson so completely that it shaped everything he touched for the rest of his life. That instinct, thrift, order, patience, did not come from a university either. Rockefeller never passed through the elite academic pipeline that produced so many of his era's industrialists. His education was practical: bookkeeping, comparison, control. He learned to read a column of figures the way other young men learned to read a battlefield, and in the years that followed, those unglamorous skills would prove far more valuable than any lecture hall. Because the story of Rockefeller is not really the story of a man who found oil. It is the story of a man who learned, earlier and more completely than almost anyone around him, how to organize it. When people imagine the birth of the American oil industry, they often picture a gusher, a sudden eruption of black liquid, a stroke of geological luck. That image belongs to other men. It does not belong to Rockefeller. He never drilled for oil. He was not interested in the ground. He was interested in what happened after the ground gave something up: the refining, the shipping, the selling. The part of the business most people never think to look at. That distinction defined everything that followed. In the raw, chaotic years of the early petroleum trade, dozens of small refiners competed against one another with little coordination, uneven quality, and no control over how their product actually reached the customer. Prices swung wildly. Wells were drilled recklessly. Refineries opened and closed within a season. It was an industry built on improvisation. Rockefeller looked at that chaos and saw something most competitors did not: an opportunity to organize what nobody else had bothered to organize. He began building a structure in which crude oil, transportation, refining, and marketing could move together under a single coordinating hand. Not a single company competing for a share of the market. A system designed to run the whole market. In the world of the late 19th century, before national regulation and before modern antitrust law, that kind of integration was not just an advantage, it was almost unstoppable. While his competitors thought in terms of individual transactions, Rockefeller thought in terms of the entire chain, and the entire chain, once controlled, was worth more than the sum of its parts. Picture the landscape that made this possible. Wooden derricks rising out of muddy fields in Pennsylvania, storage tanks crowded along riverbanks, freight cars loaded with barrels, rattling toward refineries where the air itself smelled of kerosene and burning coal. It was an industrial world of iron, steam, and soot, unglamorous, dangerous, and profitable in a way few people had yet learned how to capture consistently. Rockefeller did not romanticize any of it. He looked at the noise and the waste and asked a simple, almost accountant's question: how could this be made to run better? Standard Oil was not built on a single invention. There was no breakthrough moment, no patent, no flash of genius that separated Rockefeller from his rivals. What he had instead was discipline, applied at a scale nobody else attempted. He pursued economies of scale wherever they could be found. He absorbed weaker competitors rather than simply outcompeting them, buying up struggling refiners one by one until entire regional markets belonged to a single, coordinated system. He negotiated preferential shipping arrangements with the railroads that moved his oil, arrangements that gave Standard Oil an edge few independent refiners could match. Piece by piece, deal by deal, a fragmented industry became a coordinated one, and Rockefeller sat at its center. By 1882, that coordination had taken on a new legal form. The Standard Oil Trust was created to bind together the many affiliated companies Rockefeller had assembled, placing their shares under a single group of trustees. It was an elegant solution to an awkward problem. How do you control dozens of separately incorporated businesses spread across different states as if they were one? The trust structure answered that question, and in doing so, it gave the country a new word for concentrated economic power, a word that would soon become an accusation. Years later, one of his fiercest critics would describe his method almost admiringly, despite herself, that Rockefeller's ideal was to know and control every detail of the oil trade from beginning to end. It was written as an accusation. It also happens to be one of the most accurate descriptions of the man ever committed to paper, because that was the real innovation. Not oil, not chemistry. Control, total, granular, relentless control over a system most people were still trying to merely survive inside. And Rockefeller had one more advantage that is easy to overlook: timing. He built his empire in an era when regulation was weak and the industry itself was still young enough to be shaped by whoever moved fastest and most systematically. Efficiency and hard bargaining, combined during a narrow historical window, produced a company unlike anything American business had seen before. Power built that quickly does not go unchallenged for long. In 1892, a decade after the trust's creation, the Ohio Supreme Court ruled against the arrangement, declaring that the structure violated the state's own laws against monopoly. It was a narrow ruling in some ways, limited to Ohio, but it carried a larger warning. The trust, so carefully engineered to hold a fractured empire together, was legally vulnerable, and Rockefeller's advisors knew it. The response was not retreat, it was reorganization. By 1899, Standard Oil of New Jersey had become the new holding structure for the consolidated business, a legal reshuffling that preserved the substance of the old trust while adjusting its form to survive scrutiny. It was, in its own way, as impressive an act of engineering as the original system, proof that Rockefeller's organization could bend without breaking. But the pressure did not disappear. It grew. A journalist named Ida Tarbell began publishing a detailed, damning investigation into Standard Oil's methods, built on years of research and, in places, personal history with the industry Rockefeller had reshaped. Her account did not simply criticize Rockefeller's wealth. It attacked the methods behind it, the secret rebates, the aggressive absorption of competitors, the sense that no independent refiner could survive for long once Standard Oil decided to compete against them. The public image of Rockefeller split cleanly in two. To supporters, he represented order, efficiency, and disciplined stewardship of a chaotic new industry. To a growing and increasingly vocal group of critics, he represented something far more dangerous: monopoly, secrecy, and the quiet destruction of smaller businessmen who never stood a chance against a machine like his. Both descriptions were true at once. That is what made Rockefeller one of the first genuinely modern figures in American public life, not simply a rich man, but a symbol. The question he forced onto the country was not really about him personally. It was about something larger, whether concentrated economic power could ever be justified, even if it made an entire industry cheaper and more efficient to run. That question would eventually reach the highest court in the country.